live, and I'm sure Vicky is overwhelmed with gratitude. This is just great. Leading us in to hearing the good news some more. Very good news today as it comes to us from Exodus, the very first chapter. I always thought Exodus began with Pharaoh's daughter finding Moses in the rushes on the banks of the river. And then with Moses hearing us call at the burning bush in chapter 3. But there is a chapter 1 that gets overlooked very often. It's a two-part story. You see at the bottom left here, the first part is about loading down the people. Their enslavement is described in some detail. But the second half of the story deals with two midwives, two women who stand up to all that oppression. Let us hear now the good news as it comes to us from the very first chapter of the book of liberation known as Exodus. Now a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. You might recall that Joseph was part of the court of Egypt, and Israelite people were treated well accordingly. This new king said to his people, look, the people of the children of Israel, it's not just the children of Israel, the people of Israel, but the writer is saying they're propagating. These are the people of the children of Israel, are more numerous and more powerful than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly. He calls it it. Let us deal shrewdly with it, these objects, or they will increase. And in the event of war, they will actually join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. Therefore, they set taskmasters over them to oppress them with forced labor. They built supply cities, Pithom and Ramses, for Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, pressed down, the more they multiplied and spread, so that the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites. The Egyptians put the Israelites to work, and notice how many times the word work is refashioned in this paragraph. They put the Israelites to work at crushing labor and made their lives better with hard service in mortar and brick and every kind of field labor. They were ruthless in all the tasks they imposed on them. But now the story turns. We will hear now from the midwives. You can put up the scripture now. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other Puah. Shiphrah meaning beauty, Puah meaning a blossom. When you act as midwives to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stool, literally they're two stones, a double stones they use to receive the child. And they see them on the birth stool, if it is a boy, kill him. But if it is a girl, she shall live. But the midwives feared God. They did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but they let the boys live. So the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and said to them, why have you done this and allowed the boys to live? The midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they were vigorous and give birth before the midwife comes to them. So God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied, became very strong, and because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. God did. And then Pharaoh commanded all his people, every boy that is born to the Hebrews, you shall throw into the Nile, but you shall let every girl live. So Pharaoh doubles down here. And the rest of the story is, of course, Moses is rescued from the Nile and the people are liberated. Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church. these premier notes of liberation. Would you pray with me? As you are aware, O God, our Presbyterian Directory of Worship puts it this way about you. It says the Old Testament speaks of you in personal ways as covenant creator, covenant maker, comforter, liberator, judge, creator, redeemer, midwife, mother, et al. And as you are aware, our Presbyterian Brief Statement of Faith puts it this way: like a mother who will not forsake her newborn, like a father running to welcome his prodigal home, you are faithful still. And we lift up today, O God of faithfulness, these midwives, Shiphrah, Puah, midwives who protected the women, the mothers in their charge, and become in the process mothers of liberation. We lift them up today so that we as a church may midwife the same. Amen. Today's biblical story, not the one we have been told so often in church, the passage of us as individuals from sin into salvation. Growing up in a church predominantly of people of privilege, that's the story I always heard. It's a great story of sin into salvation, but there's a lot more to the biblical story than that. Today's Exodus story is not a passage of a privileged people from sin into salvation. The Exodus story is of a passage of an oppressed people from enslavement into liberation. And that in a nutshell is the story of Exodus. The word Exodus meaning a way out of slavery into liberation, a way out, a story that does not begin with a baby named Moses floating down a river into the arms of Pharaoh's loving daughter, that's chapter 2. And it does not begin with Moses's burning bush call to let God's people go, that's chapter 3. It's a way out of slavery that Cecil B. DeMille's movie, The Ten Commandments, does not cover. It's a way out of slavery that we begin with Exodus chapter 1, with women who made possible Moses's life to begin with. Without Shiphrah, without Puah, there is no Moses. There is no Moses. 2 midwives, seeing to it that life birthed does not become life denied. So this special Mother's Day morn, let us celebrate Shiphrah and Puah, our original mothers of the spirit of liberation. And let us celebrate their heritage in a particular way, one that honors the Exodus message of enslavement into liberation, a particular way this special Mother's Day morn, as we celebrate the maternal spirit of our God. In a particular way, because in a few moments, I invite you to sit back and appreciate with me some recent history found in some photos that will be coming up soon. Slides that lift up halting yet faithful efforts by many of our local churches these past few years to celebrate the maternal spirit of God, like Shiphrah and Puah, to midwife new life into being in a liberating way. A liberating way forged across a river as symbolically powerful as the Nile of old. One that separates us in the first world from those in the third world. I am speaking, of course, of the Rio Grande. And I am speaking, of course, of migrant mothers separated from their children in distress. How to keep their families together. How to, as a church, midwife them from the slavery of their homeland there and their detention here, to midwife them from enslavement to the promise of a new liberation. Now, we will begin in a moment with the year 2017. Not that the election of a new president then meant everything suddenly went, well, south, but the fear and the hate released at that time in the sudden separation of families all around us and the tearing of children from their mother's arms, well, some Metro DC churches had to do some midwifing, and quick. We all had to act. And the next few slides will lift up our efforts, beginning with our church, for we played a role. Again, the role of a midwife that would not allow Pharaoh to fling the infants back into or across the Nile, not without resistance. You can see here, in a symbolic fashion, we knew it was symbolic, but we were the first faith community in Maryland to declare ourselves a public sanctuary. And because of what we did, Cedar Lane Unitarian heard about us. It's a much larger congregation. And they started coming to visit us and say, how can we do this together? How can we? And you see on your right, Rosa Gutierrez. She went into public sanctuary in December of that year. Cedar Lane had used our example. They had taken it. They had run with it. And they took their much vaster resources. Rosa was heading to an airport that day to be deported. With her lawyer's help, she turned around and came to Bethesda. She was protected by Cedar Lane for over a year. Now she lives in peace in the community with her 3 children. Thanks be to God. Our example set the tempo. Midwifing new life into being, not letting mothers and their children being separated. Next slide. I'm taking these in chronological order because there was so much that happened. In April of 2017, I had the great honor of accompanying Veronica and Ricardo Castro. And here they are leading the ICE office because they have 3 children, one with Down syndrome, but ICE was threatening to deport them. Churches in the Metro DC area got together, rallied around them, and ICE knew they were in trouble. So Veronica to this day and Ricardo and their children are still protected. Thanks be to God. Midwifing new life into being. You see here a picture on the left of our fellowship hall. That's as large a number of people we've had in the fellowship hall in a while. September of that year, an organizing meeting of an organization we're part of, Sanctuary DMV, that since has changed its name to Congregation Action Network. And you see on the right, we are practicing what would happen for surprise arrest. And there have been many. You see the people on the right are taking photos or videos of what's happening to chronicle. These were the types of training we were having. Midwifing new life into being. The next slide. Couple of personal moments. I got to speak at a press conference. County has been debating whether to have legal aid funding for the undocumented. That's still in process, but we have been able to secure some funding. And the bottom photo you see there, that's the victory score, the bottom photo in June of that year, of 2018. There was a demonstration of Congregation Action Network at the ICE Center in Frederick for the release of Prince Bohutu. Now, he's not an actual prince, that's his first name, but he was freed, partially due to our efforts, the churches rallying together, midwifing new life into being. Next slide. See those teddy bears? The churches got together. We showed up at a Senate Judiciary Committee hearing. My good friend, the Reverend Sharon Stanley, who runs the Immigration Ministries with the UCC and the Disciples of Christ, organized this. And we left a teddy bear in each chair in that hearing room that says, keep us together. Each of them had a different message on them. Symbolic, yes. But they knew we were there, midwifing new life into being. You see the little child there with a sign on the right. Next slide. Another powerful witness. children in cages on the border. We all heard about that, particularly in 2018. So we decided children would gather together in those Mylar blankets, children, many of them daughters and sons of our clergy friends. And we had a protest at the Congress led by Faith in Action, the umbrella network for Congregation Action Network. Now you see the woman in the middle toward the top of the white stove. She's to the right in your picture of the African-American pastor with his arms out. That is Charlene Belsom Zelmer. She is a good friend at Cedar Lane, and she is a force to reckon with, as you will see in the next slide. Charlene took it upon herself to take these cages up to, this is Senator Ted Cruz's office, by the way, to many senators saying, here's what is happening. Symbolic, yes, but midwifing new life into being. They knew we would not go away. Next slide. Fast forward to last year during the pandemic. Binsar Siahan had been arrested, just taken away from his home next door to Glenmont United Methodist Church. With the help of Congregation Action Network, our friend there, Ruth Hamilton, the bottom left of Westminster Presbyterian, a good colleague, Binsar was released, but only through pressure, as you see here, like the kind you see downtown at the Department of Homeland Security office. Midwifing new life into being. Standing up to the pharaohs around us. And the next slide shows a vigil for Binsar. At his home church, he lived next door to the church, socially distant vigil at about the same time. Midwifing new life into being. Next slide. But this, I believe, this group is doing more than anyone else because they're not simply protesting. They're not simply doing symbolic actions. They are doing the hard work of lobbying, of standing up. Some of you may remember Lorena Montoya, founder and CEO of Aliento, which means to breathe. Trauma into hope is their theme. She deals with trauma every day with people coming to her and says, how can I remain here in our country? Reina's from Arizona. And Rainer and her partner there, Jose, brought 20 people. They spoke at one of our table talks with Cedar Lane in November 2017. On the right, you see them. This is a photo I took of them meeting with Senator James Lankford the following month. They remained here for 3 months, leaving their jobs, camping out in churches and floors, in inns, wherever they could stay. They lobbied 99 of the 100 Senate offices that would have them. Only one office would not. I will not name that senator. But they made over 300 visits to senators and staffers alike, saying, we belong here. We need the DREAM Act passed. And we are making great steps for that to happen. Midwifing new life into being. In the following slide, you see, I had the great honor and privilege for Reno to say to me, Chuck, there goes Senator Tester, go chase him down. These are forces to be reckoned with. We would pull senators aside whenever we could find them and say, here we are. The woman on the right left a good job with Verizon. They let her go because she spent 2 to 3 months here lobbying. We are grateful for the representation of Jose and Reina and all those from Aliento, who today, because of their lobbying this past week in Arizona, tomorrow several people have crossed party lines to vote to say undocumented will now have state funding for tuition for going to college. They've been working on it for years. Thanks be to God for their efforts in midwifing new life into being. And the final slide. This is what we are about. As the great Nobel Peace Prize laureate Elie Wiesel says, no human being is illegal. Human beings are not illegal aliens. They can be undocumented, but no human being is illegal. Thank you, Andrew. Now, as I compose these slides for us today, and it's running a little long, I realize, I began to feel overwhelmed for two reasons. One, I had forgotten all the efforts our churches had put in. I had forgotten how many public witnesses there have been, how many there continue to be. I've had to pull back from them myself. But the second reason I felt overwhelmed is this. Given the political division and incivility today, are our churches really making any difference? Making any difference in public policy? Are we really midwifing new lives into liberation? Maybe not so much. But then I think of Prince Mobutu. And then I think of Binsar Siahan. And then for deeper, more structural change, I think of those dreamers working with Aliento. And then I am able to breathe. Then I am able to breathe. And then I am able to celebrate what our Metro DC churches and beyond have done and continue to do, and we are a part of, as midwives of liberation. And we are able to celebrate Shifra and Puah and all mothers today who have liberated us all and continue to do so. And then finally, being able to breathe, I can turn my heart once again to the awful stories we continue to hear of enslavement in the South. Not our church history discoveries this time about slavery, but to the ongoing crisis at our border, where the first and third worlds collide. Our Nile, where the children are being flung from their mother's arms still, where our churches continue to push, continue to prod, continue to advocate in the face of our Egypt that even with our new president, the Egypt that thinks it can manage and control and even shut down the population of enslaved persons seeking liberation at our doorstep. For until major and humane immigration reform for the first time in 2 generations can occur, until that happens, our churches still remain the greatest hope. We stand as their midwives in the face of great power for a new exodus, where rivers become passageways and borders give way to a new birth of freedom. So let us continue to be like Shifra, like Puah, in the maternal spirit of the God we celebrate today. Let our churches continue to be mothers of liberation. Gracias a Dios. Amen.